When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite, obey your thirst.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be.
There are losses in college football that fade with time, and then there are losses that linger. Not because of what happened, but because of how it happened. Oklahoma's college football playoff loss to Alabama wasn't about talent gaps or being outmatched. It wasn't about Alabama reminding everybody who they are. It was about moments. It was about belief. It was about how quickly control can slip away when pressure arrives. So in this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 3 plays that flipped a playoff game, why Oklahoma looked ready until it didn't, and what this loss really says about where the program is right now. And before we're done, you know what we like to do here. We're going to zoom out. We're going to have to look at the transfer portal. Kobie McKinzie is forcing us into that. We got to look at NIL and what roster stability actually means in modern college football. So this isn't reaction as much as it is a reckoning. Welcome to the Sooner Nation podcast. Yeah, it was bad on Friday night. There are those losses in college football that you can file them away neatly, right? There's losses that you explain with injuries, that you explain with a talent gap, losses that you can explain by pointing at the other sideline and saying, that's just who they are. Then there are losses like Oklahoma's 34-24 loss to Alabama on Friday night. And this one, it doesn't sit neatly. It doesn't explain itself away. It doesn't allow you to shrug and to move on, because this game wasn't decided by Alabama imposing its will. It was decided by just a wave of emotion, right? Not because Alabama has some magic or a tidal wave of 5-star depth. Not because by some unstoppable Crimson Tide machine kind of reviving back to life. Honestly, if you look at this, and I have looked at it, I know you've looked at it, I know it's been discussed through the weekend, it's 3 plays. This game was decided by 3 plays, 3 moments, 3 decisions, 3 failures to finish, if I could say that, which I think it applies. And that's the hardest truth of all, because for large stretches of this game, Oklahoma, they weren't just hanging with Alabama. The Sooners were better than Alabama. And early on, it didn't feel like a survival exercise. It felt like very much like a statement. Like Oklahoma Memorial Stadium was alive. That stadium was incredible. The atmosphere, unforgettable. No anxiety across the board. It was loud, not hopeful. And you got a defense that's flying downhill. You got an offense that's loose and aggressive and confident. And Alabama, man, the Tide looked uncomfortable. And for the first time in a college football playoff game, Oklahoma wasn't reacting. They were dictating what was happening on the field. Up 17-0 early in the second quarter. The Sooners had done more than just score points. They had seized control of this game. They had seized the emotional temperature of this game. And Alabama, they're not just trailing on the scoreboard. They're trailing in belief. You can see it in body language. And then that's when the story turns. Not with fireworks, not with disaster, but was something I believe far more dangerous. Missed opportunity. Let's talk about the drop that changes everything, right? Because this is the first crack. It didn't really announce itself loudly, but it's the first crack in the foundation. No turnover, no penalty, no chaos, just the ball hitting the turf, right? We remember the moment. 3rd down, John Mateer feels pressure. He does exactly what you want your quarterback to do in that moment. He escapes. He keeps his eyes downfield. He trusts the design of the play. And there he is, slipping free into open space, Xavier Robinson. No defender near him, only green grass separating him and the end zone. It is literally there waiting. John Mateer throws a dime. And for all the talk we give about John Mateer, accuracy issues, gambling issues with the ball in his hands, dude delivered here. It hits Robinson in the hands and then falls incomplete. Now, that play's never going to show up as a turnover. It won't be remembered as a highlight for Alabama either. But make no mistake, that drop, that was devastating. Because that wasn't just 6 more points on the board. That was a potential knockout punch. Make that catch, Oklahoma goes up 24-7. Most likely scenario here. Make that catch, and Alabama's staring down the barrel of something very unfamiliar to them, doubt. Make that catch, and the entire tenure of this game shifts from, can Oklahoma hang with Alabama, to how does Alabama survive? Just make the catch, and that's what you've got. But instead, Oklahoma punts. And we know what followed, right? A missed opportunity turns into a moment of catastrophe. Because that drop, X-Rob's drop, forces Oklahoma to do the smart thing here. Send out the punt team. In college football, these special team errors, they don't just cost you yards. They cost belief. Snap comes back to Grayson Miller. He mishandles it. And then in an instant, everything begins to collapse. That crack in the foundation is very visible now. Timing is gone. Protection breakdowns on this play. Alabama swarms. The punt is blocked. Short field for the Tide. And suddenly Alabama has oxygen. And you know, as a fan, and I am, above all else, a fan. That's why I started this whole project. Here's the part that should make this hurt. Not the mechanics of the mistake, but the context. Elite teams don't need dominance to win. They just need openings. And Oklahoma didn't just give Alabama an opening, they handed it to them. Up until that point, Oklahoma had been aggressive, confident, fearless. And then in the span of seconds, that edge, it dulled. And we're going to talk more about this in the second segment, but Alabama, they didn't suddenly just transform. They were just simply allowed back into this game. And still, the game wasn't lost yet. The defense held. You still have a lead. Shaken, right? It's shaken, but the lead is intact. And Oklahoma has time to breathe. They have time to reset. They have time to reassert themselves. But then you kind of have the play that ended all of it. This pick 6 by John Mateer, it closed the door on this game. And he played well early. He was calm. He was poised. He was efficient. But here's the thing. Pressure has a way of distorting vision. On a throw that he really couldn't afford to force, he didn't hesitate. It was a blown assignment. And Alabama, Xavier Brown, he reads it. He's there. He's the only play there. And it's not like he stepped in front of it. He was there. The pass was to him. 50 yards the other way, pick 6. And just like that, the 17-point lead is gone. And what follows that is not panic. It wasn't anger, but it was silence. The kind of silence that settles in when everyone in the building realizes the same thing at the same time. This game has turned. That interception, it didn't just tie the score, it completed Alabama's resurrection. It erased Oklahoma's emotional advantage, and it handed Alabama the psychological reset that they need. And Alabama immediately won that reset. And from that moment forward, Oklahoma, they weren't playing to extend a lead. They were playing not to make other mistakes. Meanwhile, Alabama, they're free, right? They're free to do what they want because they've completed the comeback. They are the zombies resurrected from the dead. And let me tell you why this loss cuts deeper than most. It's not just because it was the college football playoff. And again, I'm a fan. Heartland Sports, it started by fans. The Facebook page by fans. That's why we're 16,000 plus. We're fans. And this is why it's painful. Sooner Nation podcast, fan driven. But this wasn't about being overmatched. This wasn't about being outclassed. This wasn't about not belonging on this stage. Oklahoma's defense did enough to win this game. They held Alabama at under 300 yards. That's a formula that works almost every time. They got pressure on Ty Simpson. They tackled in space. They avoided, for the most part, explosive breakdowns. But football is not played in isolation. It's played in moments. And Oklahoma couldn't survive those moments that they created for themselves. After those 3 plays, the offense never regained its rhythm. I'm going to tell you why in the second segment. But drives stalled, confidence evaporated, and special teams continued to betray them. Tate Sandell, goodness gracious, the Groza Award winner. I told you, I voted for him. I've been telling you since October I was going to vote for him. One of the most reliable kickers in the country. He misses not 1, but 2 field goals. And those didn't cause the collapse, but they sealed it. Championship games, championship moments, they don't forgive hesitation. They don't forgive imprecision. Not even from your most trusted guys on the field. And that's the cruel irony here. Because this wasn't a we didn't belong loss. This was a we had them where we wanted them loss. And the uncomfortable truth is this, that this game will live in Oklahoma's memory because it represents progress and failure in the same breath. The Sooners proved that they can control a playoff game. They proved that they can dictate terms against college football's gold standard. They proved that they belong on that stage. But they also learned the hardest lesson that there is at this level. Greatness, it's not about starting strong. It's about finishing without blinking. And 3 plays, a drop, a botched punt, and a pick six, they flipped the script here. Not because Alabama's invincible, but because Oklahoma let doubt creep in where confidence had been thriving. It's not a condemnation of this program. It's more so a challenge. And this is what we're going to get into here in the second segment, because the next step for Oklahoma, it's not getting back to the college football playoff. It's learning how to close in these moments when it arrives. And until that lessons learned, nights like Friday night, they're going to continue to linger. Not as proof of failure, but as reminders of how close greatness truly is, but yet still feeling so far away.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. You're ready to move your business forward, but first you need to find the right team. Start your search with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It can help you reach qualified candidates fast, ensuring your listing is the first one they see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. See the results for yourself. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee.
Finish your fantasy lineup?
No, but I'm joining this paid group chat with insider info.
Dude, seriously? Forward it to me. Security alert from McAfee. That group's as legit as that knockoff jersey you're wearing.
McAfee's scam detector is available in all McAfee plans for as little as $39.99 for your first year. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
So I got to start this second segment just by saying thank you to everybody who listens to the podcast, who subscribes to the podcast, who gives us a good rating. Thanks for checking in, whether it's one time every week, every episode. Thanks for visiting the website. Thanks for being a member of our community on Facebook. I'm thankful we made it through the full football season. Stayed pretty regular this year, as opposed to years past with crazy life happenings. Just want to say thank you. And if you're not subscribed, if you're not giving us a good rating, do that. We love having you a part of our community. Check us out online, heartland-sports.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram. We're there. Join our community. We're thankful for you. So let's get back into this. This is hard for me. The third loss of the season, and honestly, I don't know. I guess it's just the finality of it all. There are games I picked Oklahoma to lose this year, and they won. I picked Oklahoma to lose in Knoxville. They won. I picked Oklahoma to lose in Tuscaloosa. They won. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I should have picked them to lose. I don't know. But here's the thing. The highest level of college football, games, they're not decided by playbooks. They're decided by belief, by comfort under pressure, by emotional balance when the game starts flowing through the script, and by which team understands who it is when the momentum shifts and which team doesn't. And I think that's the only way to fully understand this loss for Oklahoma on Friday night. Because the more you dive in, the more you examine this game, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't about talent. It wasn't about scheme. It wasn't about preparation. It was about mental leverage and how quickly it changed hands. And here's the cruel irony again in all this. Oklahoma already showed the world exactly how to beat Alabama a month ago. On November 15th in Tuscaloosa, a place where most teams, they don't survive very long there. The Sooners pulled off a win that made absolutely no sense if only you look at the box score, right? And suddenly, Alabama fans are in favor of turnovers trumping yardage, but whatever. Oklahoma's outgained in that Tuscaloosa match. They didn't control the clock on November 15th. They didn't dominate offensively, and yet they won. Why? Because Oklahoma controlled the emotional economy of that game. The Sooners forced turnovers. They capitalized on special teams mistakes. They stayed calm when Alabama began to press. That game, it wasn't a fluke. It was a case study in psychological football. The Sooners, they didn't win because they were better. They won because they were more steady. And now you fast forward a month and 4 days later, Friday night in Norman, it was the same case study, just with the names flipped. Earlier in the game, we know this, Oklahoma looked ready. They didn't look hopeful. They looked ready. Up 17-0. I didn't think it felt fragile. I didn't think it felt lucky. I think my perspective in that moment that this was earned. The offense was decisive. The defense was aggressive. And the Sooners, they weren't just executing. They were comfortable in what they were doing. And Alabama, through that first quarter, midway through the second quarter, they looked like the team searching for answers, right? And that's important. That's important for us to know because comfort is everything at this level. But the moment doesn't need a catastrophe to shift. Sometimes it just needs hesitation. We talked about it in that opening segment. 3 plays. Not because of what they did on the scoreboard, but because of what they did to Oklahoma's mindset. These 3 plays quietly changed everything. A drop pass that would have extended control. A special teams breakdown that invited chaos. A defensive touchdown that erased certainty. Up until that point, Oklahoma was hunting. Oklahoma was dictating the pace. Oklahoma was dictating emotion. But once Alabama tied the game, Oklahoma became reactive. And that's the pivot. Instead of leaning into aggression, Oklahoma leaned into caution. Instead of playing to disrupt, the Sooners started playing to avoid mistakes. And that's when the roles reversed completely. Because we've already seen this movie. We just saw it from a different angle. Back in November, Oklahoma didn't dominate Alabama statistically, but it understood that it didn't need to. The Sooners weren't chasing perfection. They were managing pressure. Alabama, meanwhile, they grew impatient. They forced throws. They made special teams errors, right? They're trying to wrestle control back instead of letting the game breathe. And Oklahoma benefited in that November game because it stayed mentally steady. But Friday night, Alabama was the steady one. Look at the stat lines. Look at them. In Norman, Oklahoma actually outgained Alabama. Oklahoma moved the ball. Oklahoma created opportunities. This was not a case of Alabama steamrolling anyone. And yet Oklahoma never regained emotional footing once this game tightened and then was tied up. That's the difference. Alabama has lived here for decades. Tight playoff games, ugly stretches, moments where nothing feels clean, right? They understand something fundamental. Momentum is temporary. Pressure, if you're patient, usually works for you. Oklahoma historically hasn't had that same postseason muscle memory. And that reality surfaced the moment the early lead disappeared. From that moment on, Alabama played free football. It didn't chase the points. It didn't force the throws. It didn't panic. It waited. It didn't do what they did in Tuscaloosa. Alabama understood something that night that Oklahoma is still learning. Anxiety is contagious. And once a team starts thinking about consequences instead of execution, mistakes don't need to be forced. They're going to arrive on their own. And this is where the comparison between the 2 games, the November meeting, the playoff meeting, it becomes unavoidable. And in Tuscaloosa, Alabama missed a 36-yard field goal. Alabama allowed a long punt return that set up Oklahoma's first score. And Oklahoma didn't flinch. The Sooners didn't rush. They didn't overextend. But on Friday night, what happens? Oklahoma made special teams mistakes. And Alabama immediately turned them into leverage. In Tuscaloosa, Oklahoma forced turnovers that tilted the emotional balance of the game. On Friday night in Norman, Alabama forced 1 turnover. But that mattered the most because it landed like a psychological hammer. In November, Oklahoma had fewer yards and still won because it understood how to manage pressure. In December, Oklahoma has more yards and they lose because pressure managed them. Same formula, different execution. And that tells us something important about where Oklahoma is as a program right now. The Sooners are good enough to build a lead on teams like Alabama. They're good enough to host college football playoff games. They're good enough to dictate early terms, and they're good enough to win games where the margins are razor thin. We saw that all season long. But what they're still learning is how to respond when those margins tilt against them, especially on the sport's biggest stage. Because this is not about toughness. This is not about desire. It's not about effort. It's about experience and identity. Oklahoma has learned how to be the disruptor, but it has not yet mastered how to be the favorite who absorbs disruption without flinching. And that distinction matters on stages like the college football playoff. Because playoff games, they're never clean. They are messy. They are emotional. They are volatile. Momentum swings, they're inevitable. The teams that win aren't the ones that avoid mistakes entirely. They are the ones that don't let mistakes change who they are. Alabama never stopped being Alabama on Friday night. But Oklahoma briefly stopped being Oklahoma. Now, that doesn't erase the progress that this program has made. If anything, it sharpens the picture. The Sooners don't need to reinvent themselves. They don't need to overhaul philosophy or chase a new identity. What they need to do is they need to harden the identity that they already have, especially when the game stops going according to their plan. The difference between November and December, it wasn't preparation. It was composure. And until Oklahoma learns to carry the same confidence after momentum shifts as it does before them, these postseason games, they're going to continue to feel painfully familiar. Even when the circumstances are flipped, Friday wasn't about Alabama stealing something from Oklahoma. It was about Alabama becoming Oklahoma, forcing the mistakes, surviving the chaos, and trusting that pressure, it would just do the rest. And in the end, the team that understood that truth, they're the team that walked off the field still playing in this tournament. And legitimately, all we can do as Oklahoma fans is just say, congratulations, Alabama. Hopefully we'll see you next year.
The who's down in Who Newville were making their list, but some didn't know Walmart has the best brands for their gifts.
What about toys? Do they have brands kids have been wanting all year?
Yep, Barbie, Tony's, and Lego. Gifts that will make them all cheer.
Do you mean they have all the brands I adore?
They have Nintendo, Nespresso, Apple, and more.
What about...
So the Who answered questions from friends till they were blue. Each one listened and shouted, from Walmart? Who knew? Shop gifts from top brands for everyone on your list in the Walmart app.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
So what I wanted to do, what I initially planned on doing with this final segment is really focusing on John Mateer and his decision, whether to enter the NFL or not, to come back to Norman, whatever he's doing. I have a whole thing about that because I know I saw the social media reaction when Mateer said, yeah, I'm going to spend some time weighing my options and think. Listen, we'll have an article up on the website, heartland-sports.com. It'll be up there on Monday. We'll get to this in the next podcast on Tuesday night. But John Mateer really does have a decision. I mean, there is a legitimate NFL decision there, and we'll break it down and we'll get to it. But let me just tell you two things. Mel Kiper Jr., for whatever he is, I know people don't trust him, and then people over-trust him, but he has Mateer as a top 5 quarterback prospect in this draft. This draft in general, the quarterback class is weak. It's way down. 2027 is going to be way up. So there are things for Mateer to consider. I just can't get to those things because of Kobie McKinzie and his announcement that dropped tonight. He's entering the transfer portal. That's forcing me to change this final segment that direction. And there was a time in college football, when a player entering the transfer portal, it meant exactly one thing, that he's gone, right? No ambiguity, no nuance, no waiting period. Once a name hit the list, everyone understood the message. The relationship was over and both sides were moving on. But here's the thing. Here's why I think we need to pump the brakes just a little bit, because that assumption no longer holds. Not in college athletics, not in college football, not in the SEC, and certainly not at the University of Oklahoma. So when Kobie McKinzie's name first surfaced on Sunday as heading towards the transfer portal, the reaction follows a similar pattern. You know, there's surprise, there's concern, there's speculation, and then eventually the question that now hovers over almost every portal situation involving a recognizable contributor is this: is this about football? Or is this about leverage? Because the uncomfortable truth in the modern era of college football is that oftentimes it's both, right? And that's what makes Kobie McKinzie's situation worth paying attention to and worth talking about. Not because of who he is as a player alone, but because of what this moment represents in the modern college football ecosystem. Whether Kobie McKinzie ultimately leaves Oklahoma or returns, it may matter on the depth chart. But what matters more is what his portal entry says about how roster stability actually works now. Because stability in this era, it's no longer about loyalty or long-term development plans. It's about alignment. It's about perceived value. It's very much about leverage. And none of that makes anyone a villain. 10 years ago, entering the transfer portal was a nuclear option, right? I'm leaving this, and it wasn't even a transfer portal. It's just, I'm leaving. Coaches treated it as a point of no return. Teammates saw it as this guy quitting on us. Fans, we viewed it as betrayal. But today it's something very different. Today it's closer to an opening bid, if we're being honest. Players enter the portal for all kinds of reasons: playing time, schematic fit, family considerations. But it's also become a tool for self-evaluation, a way to ask hard questions that don't always get answered cleanly inside the program. Questions like, what am I worth? Who values me? Where do I stand right now? And those questions, they used to be rhetorical. Now they come with real answers. They come quickly, they come directly, and often they come with a financial attachment. And that's where I think you can compare David Stone. I think that story kind of lingers in the background of what's happening with McKinzie. Because even if the details are not identical, Stone's brief portal entry last spring fundamentally changed how Oklahoma fans interpret these type of moments. It showed that entering the portal doesn't always mean a player wants out. Sometimes it means he wants clarity. And sometimes it means he wants security. And I think that's where McKinzie's case becomes especially interesting. Not fully a household name outside of Sooner Nation, right? What I'm saying is this is not a national award candidate. He's not someone you build a marketing campaign around. And this is a guy that lost his starting job because he was injured. But it's something far more complicated, far more common, especially in today's college football economy, right? Kobie McKinzie is a rotational contributor with upside. He can start, but he lost his starting job. That's what we're talking about, right? And those players, they live in the most precarious space of the NIL era, right? So they matter enough that you got to replace them if they're gone. They're valuable enough to draw interest from other suitors. But the truth is this: they're not irreplaceable, at least not on paper. And for a linebacker like McKinzie, entering the portal, it may not be about dissatisfaction at all, right? It may be about recalibration. Again, where do I fit? What is my role? How secure is my future? I got 1 year left of college eligibility. Can I make it to the NFL from this launching pad? Or am I just a piece? Am I an afterthought? And those are difficult conversations to have internally, especially within a program that's navigating roster churn, playoff expectations, and this transition. We're only year 2 into the SEC. That raises the stakes for everyone involved. So the portal, for better or worse, has become the place where those answers, they arrive unfiltered. And that brings us to the question that no one really wants to ask out loud, but everybody understands is a part of the equation, right? With the NIL, no one in Oklahoma is going to say it publicly that NIL plays a role in these decisions. And then the players aren't going to say it either. But that silence doesn't mean it's not a part of the calculus. And in the modern game, in the modern era, NIL, it's not a bonus anymore. It is a baseline. So for many players, especially those who aren't projected to be first-round picks, NIL represents stability in a sport that still offers no long-term guarantees. It's rent money. It's family support. It's insurance against injury or being buried on a depth chart overnight. And if McKinsey's testing the market to understand his NIL value, that doesn't make him a mercenary. What it does is it makes him rational. And the uncomfortable truth here for programs that players no longer wait passively for validation. They seek it. And the portal provides instant feedback. That doesn't mean that Kobie McKinzie is staging a standoff. It doesn't mean that he's issuing ultimatums. What it means is that he's operating within the rules as they currently exist. Rules the NCAA created, by the way, and then largely just walked away from, leaving programs to manage the fallout on their own in real time. And so from Oklahoma's perspective, moments like this, they're frustrating both for the athletic department, for the coaching staff, and for the fan base. Not because they're unexpected, but because they highlight how little control staffs truly have now. You can recruit well, you can develop players, you can communicate clearly, and still, you can wake up one morning and find, a contributing player exploring other options. That's not a failure of culture. That is the cost of participating in the modern era of college football. And the real challenge for Oklahoma, it's not preventing portal entries. I mean, that's impossible. The challenge here for the Sooners, for this program, it's discernment. Which players do you re-engage? Which players do you just let walk? Where do you draw the financial lines when everybody, including your fourth string punter, wants to get paid? I know no one has a fourth string punter. I get that, okay? But the point is still there. How do you balance retention with long-term roster health? Those decisions are happening constantly, quietly, and with incomplete information, right? Look at Jaden Ott, incomplete information. And they're happening at every major program in the country, not just at Oklahoma. That's why this moment shouldn't trigger panic. It shouldn't trigger perspective, is what it should trigger is perspective. The portal doesn't always signal discontent. Sometimes it signals curiosity. Sometimes it signals insecurity. Sometimes it signals ambition. And maybe sometimes it's just simply a pause. Kobie McKinzie may leave. He may return. Either outcome fits the current landscape. What matters more is how Oklahoma and the fan base, how we understand what these moments actually mean? Roster building is no longer linear, right? Careers aren't always contained within a single locker room. Loyalty, it still exists, but now it competes with opportunity in ways that it never had to before. Now, that's not just me being an old guy and talking about nostalgia. That's reality. If there's discomfort around Kobie McKinzie's portal entry, it's because it reflects a broader truth about the sport itself. College football has shifted from program-centric to player-centric, and there's no going back. Programs either adapt to this or they fall behind. Players advocate or they get left behind. Neither side is wrong. They're just navigating a system that incentivizes movement and monetizes uncertainty. So Kobie McKinzie didn't break that system. He's simply operating inside of it. And until college football finds equilibrium, if it ever does, these moments will keep happening. Some of them will be quietly. Some of them will be publicly. Some of them will be awkwardly. The portal isn't an indictment anymore. It is a conversation. And Oklahoma, like everyone else, has to decide how it wants to answer. So, recapping. Losses like Oklahoma and Alabama, they're hard to process because they live in the space between progress and regret. Oklahoma didn't lose because it doesn't belong. It lost because, well, belonging to this level requires something more. It requires composure when momentum turns, clarity when pressure rises, confidence that doesn't fade when control slips. And that lesson applies beyond one game. It applies to roster decisions. It applies to the transfer portal. And it applies to navigating the sport that no longer stands still. I don't want to sound like Lincoln Riley, but this program, it's close. It's closer than the pain of this moment, right, wants to admit. So the next step, it's not louder declarations or bigger swings. The next step for this program is just learning how to finish games, how to finish seasons, how to finish conversations without blinking. That's the difference between being a part of the moment and owning the moment. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time here on the Sooner Nation podcast. I hope you have an amazing week, whatever's in store for you. We'll talk to you later. Boomer Sooner.
I'm gonna be the man who's working hard for you.